Hey everyone, this is Eric Vasquez here for Design Cuts, and today we're going to be creating a cool nautical themed playing card design. We're going to be using a lot of great vectors, textures, and all kinds of cool stuff from the latest Ultimate Vector bundle. And you guys will have access to some of the freebies for this tutorial today, but I encourage you to go ahead and check out the full bundle, which is only $29 and is going to be a huge time saver for you guys whenever you want to incorporate some really high-end, professional looking vector art into your own designs and pieces. So let's jump right into today's tutorial. The first thing I'm going to do here is open up Photoshop and create a new document. And we're going to make it 1418 pixels wide by 2126 pixels high. We're going to leave that as the dimensions and set a resolution of 300, RGB color mode 8-bit, background content set to black. And then let's just go ahead and enter a name for this. So I'm going to be calling this From the Deep playing card design because it's going to be a nautical theme. So From the Deep seems like something that will work. And I know the dimensions seem a bit odd, but I'm just doing this because it's double of what a normal playing card would be. So I'm doing twice the size of a normal one, just to have a higher res version available. All right, because it's always better to start with something larger than you may need and shrink it down rather than starting off with something small and trying to blow it up, which will oftentimes result in a distorted and pixelated image. So the first thing we're going to do here once we have our new document is double click on the background layer, and then I'm just going to type in background in the name in all caps and hit OK. Then go ahead and press Command G to put it into a group folder, and I'm just going to double click to rename that Black BG. Okay, so from here we're going to go ahead and head over to our freebies folder for this tutorial, and the first thing that we want to do is open up this chart grid EPS file that I'm going to open in Illustrator here, and this is going to serve as kind of a background element for our design. So we're just laying the foundation here and starting off with the background. So I'm just going to click and drag around this entire pattern here, press Command C to copy it, Command and Tab to go back to Photoshop, and then we'll press Command V and we're going to paste this in as a smart object. So once you paste this in, you'll have a bounding box around your image, and that's going to allow you to transform it before you apply the changes and decide where you want to place it. So I'm going to hold Shift and the Alt Option key and just drag outwards from the top right corner just to scale that up, and then hold Shift and kind of drag it over to the left a bit just so it covers your entire workspace. Then go ahead and press Enter or Return on the keyboard. Now, once I press Enter or Return, it looks like my lines are a little bit faded. So what we want to do here is actually change the color and the intensity. So I'm going to first go ahead and double click on the layer to bring up my layer style dialog box, and then check off this option here that says color overlay. Now for the color, I'm going to go ahead and enter a hex value of 484848, which is this kind of darkish gray color. Go ahead and click OK to apply the changes. And from there, what I want to do is actually duplicate this layer. But before I do that, I'm going to press the number 8 on the keyboard to reduce the opacity to 80%, which you can see right over here. And then go ahead and press Command J to duplicate that layer once. So now we can see those lines again, and it's looking a little bit better and brighter. All right, so from here I'm going to hold the Shift key, make sure my top layer is selected, and then click on the layer just below. And now that I have both of those copies selected at the same time, press Command G to once again put both of these into a layer folder, which I'm going to call Map Maker Pattern, or you can call it Grid, or anything you want. Okay, so let's go back to our freebie folder. And now what we want to do is try to find another element here that we're going to use in our background. So for this, we're going to go into our Celtic pattern brush 13, open this up in Illustrator, do the same thing, click and drag around it, press Command C, then Command and Tab, hit Tab twice to come back over to Photoshop if you need to, and then Command V to once again paste this as a smart object. Now this time when I paste it in, it should fall right where it needs to be with a little bit of padding and breathing room around all four sides. Okay, and you can move that or reposition it if you need to by pressing Command T and applying a free transform. But for now, this looks pretty good. So what I want to do is just kind of click on this layer first to rename it, and I'm just going to call it Celtic Brush Border. And then I'll go ahead and double click on this to once again bring open my layer styles, check off color overlay, and it's going to remember the same color that we just used previously. So go ahead and click OK to apply those changes. And now what I want to do is go ahead and put that into another group folder just to help keep things organized. So I want the group folder to have the same name. So what I'm going to do is double click on it, and it appears that this entire line of text here is highlighted. So press Command C, then Command G to put it into a folder. Double click on group 1 and press Command V to paste that text right there. All right, so we're in pretty good shape so far. Let's move on. I'm going to come back over to my Finder here, navigate to the freebies folder, and the next thing that we're going to bring in is our vintage frame. All right, so let's go ahead and pop that open in Illustrator. I'm just going to zoom in so you guys can see this. It's a really kind of ornate and super detailed vintage frame, which looks really cool. So I wanted to try and integrate this into our design. So instead of clicking and dragging around this, I'll press Command A to select all, and then Command C, and then once again Command Tab twice to navigate back to Photoshop. Command V to paste it, and make sure that Smart Object is selected, and then go ahead and hit OK. Now before we press return to commit our changes here, I want to go ahead and hold down the Control key, click on the image, and then we're going to choose Rotate 90 degrees counterclockwise. So that's just going to flip it upright, and then from there, I'm going to hold down Alt, Option, and Shift and drag outwards from the upper right-hand corner, just so that I can scale this up from the center. Okay, and about there looks pretty good, so now I can go ahead and hit return just to apply those changes. And now once again, double click on the layer and check off color overlay to apply that same gray color that we had before. Now for this, I'm just going to go ahead and rename this. Maybe I'll just go ahead and call this one Vintage Frame. All right, press Command G to put it into a folder, and then just rename it. So this is just kind of a good practice and a good, kind of habit to get into for organizing layers or placing similar layers into folders. Okay, so the next thing we're going to do here is go back to our freebies folder, and this time we're going to bring in the Vintage Elements 2 banner. All right, so we just brought in the frame, now we're going to bring in the banner, which were both created for this awesome vector bundle pack. So now I will click and drag around this, copy it, come back to Photoshop, make sure I'm at the top here on my Vintage Frame folder, and then press Command V to paste it as a Smart Object. Hold the Shift key and drag this up a bit, and then hold Alt, Option, and Shift and drag in to scale it down from the center, just about there, and then go ahead and press Return. Now, just like we've been doing, we can kind of move this up here, and then we'll go ahead and double click, apply the gray color overlay, and hit OK. And then we'll just rename this layer Ribbon or Banner, or you can call it pretty much anything that you want. All right, and then we'll go ahead and press Command G, and we'll call this one Vintage Banner. All right. So far, so good. I now want to select the Vintage Banner and the Vintage Frame layer while holding the Command key, and just tap it down a bit just to give myself a little bit more space up top. All right, now let's just select the banner, tap it up a few times, just to kind of space things out a little bit more. Once you have that, come down here to the bottom of the Layers palette and click on the New Layer option. Press T on the keyboard to get your text tool, and then press D on the keyboard to make sure you have your default colors. And you can see down here on the lower left of the toolbar, if I press the X key, I can toggle back and forth between my default colors of black and white. So I want to make sure that white is my foreground color, and then click up here inside the ribbon or the banner, and we're going to type out the words From the Deep. And for the typeface here, if I click inside, you can notice on the top toolbar, I'm using a font called Franchise, which is a free font that you guys can download. And there should be a link for that. I believe I downloaded this one from Font Zone or a similar site like that. But that is totally free for you guys to use for this tutorial. Now, once you've typed that out, go ahead and click on the Move tool just to kind of deselect that. And I'm going to press Command T to do a free transform, and then hold Alt, Option, and Shift and scale it down from the center once again, just so that we can kind of place it in the center of the ribbon here. And I'll go ahead and press Return and maybe tap it down a few times so it's kind of right in the middle. But let's zoom in so we can get a little bit better look. I'm going to use the spacebar to get this hand, and then just click and drag upwards to navigate around my canvas here. Press T to get your type tool once again, and then click 2 or 3 times to highlight the text. And now what we want to do is look up here in the toolbar, and you'll notice this little icon that looks like an angled T with kind of a curved line below it. Let's just go ahead and click on that, and that's going to bring open our Warp Text dialog box. So right here where it says Style None, go ahead and click on that, and we're going to choose the first option here to arc our text. Now as soon as I do that, you get this preview, and you can see how your text is bending. It's a little bit more intense or extreme than we want though, so let's just go ahead and move this slider over a little bit, maybe so it's set to around 18 or so, like there. And that looks like it follows the shape of the banner pretty closely. So now we can go ahead and hit OK. Click on the Move tool again over here in your toolbar just to deselect that. And then just hold the Shift key and tap the down arrow once or twice just to kind of visually center the text inside of that middle part of the banner. Now what we want to do from here is press Command J to duplicate it, and then Command in the left bracket to move this duplicate of the layer below the original. Now double click on the duplicate layer, check off Color Overlay, and change the color from this dark gray to solid black, which should be 0, 0, 0, 6 zeros basically. Then go ahead and hit OK to apply those changes. And now what we want to do is use the down arrow and just tap it down maybe 4 or 5 times. Yeah, maybe even 5 or 6 times. And that just creates a little bit of a drop shadow effect here. But it gives you kind of a sharper looking shadow as opposed to a soft and diffused one. So at this point, what I'm going to do is open up my vintage banner folder here just by clicking that small arrow. And now I'm going to hold the Shift key and select both of my text layers, and then just drag these inside of the banner. Okay, so now this entire folder should be our text and our banner together. All right, from here I'm going to zoom out and fit this entire image to my screen by pressing Command and 0 on the keyboard. That's basically going to zoom it at 100%. Then let's go back to our freebie folder. The next thing that I want to bring in here is the club with Map Maker brush. Now, I basically just created this club shape, and I used one of the nautical themed brushes to create this cool kind of rough stroke or outline around it. Now, if you guys do go ahead and get the full bundle, you'll have access to all of these cool custom brushes that you can use to create your own maps, along with some of the grid patterns and a lot more cool stuff in there. So for now, I'm just going to drag this tab over to the side, and we want to grab our Club Smart object and just click and drag it into our main document while holding the Shift key. And that's just going to place it basically in the middle or close to the middle of our workspace. So what I want to do now is hold the Shift key and just kind of tap this down a bit and maybe to the right a few times just so I can again try to center this visually, or just get it in a nice placement. Maybe somewhere about here looks pretty good. Okay, and that's looking good. So we want our club shape front and center there on top of our vintage frame and below our ribbon with the From the Deep text. So the next thing that I want to do here is come back to my freebies, and we're going to grab a nice grunge texture. All right, I'm going to grab 15.png and just open this up directly in Photoshop. Now what I can do is drag this in, just click and drag, and I want to close a few of those tabs. So I'm going to press Command and the tilde key, which should be right next to the 1 key on your keyboard. And now I can press Command W to close that tab, and Command W once again to close that tab as well. Now I'm going to hold down the Control key and click on Layer 1, change it to a Smart Object, or convert it to a Smart Object, and then double click the layer, and I'm just going to call it 15.png. Now what I want to do is double click on the layer to bring up my layer styles, check off Color Overlay, and then let's go ahead and change this from solid black back to our gray, 484848. Press Enter twice to apply the changes, and now go ahead and press Command T to do a free transform. Hold down the Alt, Option, and Shift keys and just drag inwards a bit to scale it down, and just kind of position it on top of the club somewhere around here. Go ahead and press Return once you're happy with the size and the placement of the grunge texture. And now what we're going to do is reduce the opacity of that texture to about 50%. Now select the club texture, or the club shape just below. Press W on the keyboard to get your magic wand tool. And now we're just going to click inside of this club shape, and it's going to select all of the black that's inside the inner part of that shape. So once you kind of see these marching ants here, you'll know that you have an active selection. And once you see that, you'll want to come up here to the Select menu, choose Modify, Contract, and let's go ahead and contract this by about maybe 10 to 12 pixels. I'll enter a value of 10, press Return, and now select your grunge texture, or 15.png, and now come down to the bottom of the Layers palette and click on this Add Layer Mask icon. And what that's going to do is apply a layer mask so that you only see the grunge texture inside of the club shape with about a 10 pixel buffer or border around the edges. So it gives it a little bit of what looks like an inner line or an inner stroke around that. Okay, but that's looking pretty cool. From here, go ahead and create a new layer, which you can do by pressing Command, Option, Shift, and the letter N on the keyboard, or you can just come down here to the bottom of the Layers palette and click on the new layer icon. Press T to get your type tool, and then click inside of the club shape here, and we're just going to type out the words Ace of Clubs using the same free franchise font. Now, this time I'm going to change the color to something else. So go ahead and double click on the text layer over here, check off color overlay, and for this fill color, let's go ahead and change this to D02F2F, which is this nice, slightly desaturated red color. Go ahead and click OK twice to apply the changes, and you should now have some red text right here in the middle. Okay, so what we want to do now is grab our type tool, click inside a few times to highlight the type, and we're going to return up here to our warp text option. Again, this is the icon for creating warp text that looks like a capital T with a curve underneath it. But this time for the style, instead of using arc like we did before, we're actually going to choose arc lower. Now, we don't want a positive value. You see a little plus sign here that says plus 50. We actually want to go the opposite way. So I'm going to drag this slider towards the left until it's set to around negative, let's go negative 18, and then hit OK. Now I'll click on my move tool to kind of deselect that. And what I want to do now is basically just kind of stretch this out a little bit. So press Command T, and if I hover my cursor over the top handle here, you'll see how it changes to that up and down arrow. So once you see that, click and hold the Alt Option key, and then just drag upwards, and it's going to extend it both up and down at the same time, so in both directions. Now move your cursor over the right or the left handle and actually drag it inwards while holding the Alt Option and Shift key, and that's just going to make it appear slightly more condensed. So you should have something like this, and then once you're happy with the appearance of your text, go ahead and press Return to apply the changes. Now I'm going to tap it down a few times while holding Shift just to kind of get it, visually centered. And then press Command J to make a copy of it, and Command in the left bracket to move the copy below the original. Now what we're going to do from here is double click on the copy and change the color overlay from this red color to solid black. Click OK twice to apply the changes, and then once again tap the down arrow maybe 5 or 6 times just to get that same nice drop shadow effect. Alright, so you should have something like this now. Alright, so let's go back to our freebie folder, and the next thing I'm going to open here is Vintage Elements 4 underscore the, and you'll see what that is when I open it in Illustrator. It's basically just the word the, which is just a catchword that we're going to add here in our document. So select it and press Command C, Command Tab 2 times to come back over to Photoshop, and then Command V and paste it as a smart object. And then let's just hold the Shift key and move it up a bit, and we can make it a bit larger by holding Alt Option and Shift and dragging outwards from any of the 4 corners of the bounding box. And go ahead and press Return to apply the changes. Tap it up a few times, and then double click on the layer to open up the layer styles. Check off color overlay, and let's just change this to a solid white, or 6 Fs basically. There we go. All right, and now we can go ahead and center all of these. So I'm just going to rename this layer really quick by double clicking on it. Just call it the. And I'm going to hold the Shift key, make sure that my top layer is selected, and then click on my Ace of Clubs copy. Now from here, come to your top toolbar, and I'm going to choose this Align Horizontal Centers option, and that's just going to make sure that my text is nice and centered. So now I can tap this over a few times while I have all 3 layers selected, and maybe tap it down just a couple of clicks as well. Now what I can do is press Command G while I have these 3 layers selected, double click on the Group 1 name here, and let's just go ahead and change it to the Ace of Clubs, just so we know what that is and we can easily identify it. All right, and I'm going to do the same here for my club shape and the grunge texture as well. So click on the 15.png layer, hold Shift and click on the Club Smart Object, press Command G, and let's just go ahead and rename this one Club or Club Shape or Club Symbol, anything that you want, as long as it has that keyword of club in there so that you know what it is. All right, let's go back to our freebie folder, and the next thing we're going to open here is our mountain symbol. So I'm going to open this layer in Illustrator, and you guys will see that it's just another cool element here that you guys will get these really nice vector mountains that will fit perfectly with our nautical themed design here. All right, so go ahead and press Command C, Command Tab to come back into Photoshop. Click on your Ace of Clubs group folder so that you have your topmost folder selected, and then press Command V and paste it as a smart object. And now I'm going to make it a bit larger, so hold Alt Option and Shift and drag out to scale it outwards from the center. Hold Shift and just drag it down a bit, And what we want to do is actually have these mountains kind of intersect or cut into our Ace of Clubs text. So I'm going to try and find a placement here that I like. Just looking at the way that the brown shape of the mountains kind of cuts into the text a little bit. And I think something like that looks pretty good. So from here, let's go ahead and double click on this layer, check off color overlay, and make sure that it's a solid white fill, and then go ahead and hit OK. And then I can double click on the layer, and I'm just going to call this Mountains, press Command G to put it into a folder, and just rename that Mountains. And then what I'm going to do is hold down the Command key and click on the Smart Object thumbnail for the Mountains Smart Object layer. And that's going to activate a selection just around that entire mountain shape. So once you see that, come up to the Select menu, choose Modify, and this time instead of Contract like we did before, we're going to expand the selection. Okay, so once we have that, we're going to expand this by 6 pixels, press OK, and then from there, what we're going to do is press Command-Shift-I to invert the selection, and then select your Ace of Clubs text folder, and then click on the Add Layer Mask icon at the bottom of the Layers palette. And now by doing that, you'll see that we've created a mask for our text group folder that basically makes it look like there's an outline around the mountains kind of cutting into our text. But if you want to experiment with the placement of the text, all you have to do is open the Ace of Clubs group folder, select both of these text layers inside, and now you can kind of tap it up or move it around however you want without worrying about screwing up the mask, because instead of moving the entire folder, we're just moving the objects inside. Okay, but you should now have something like this, and we're looking pretty good so far. The next thing I want to do is come back into my club symbol group folder, select the club smart object, press W on the keyboard to get your magic wand tool, and once again click inside so that you have all of the black selected inside of this shape. Now I'm going to close the folder, select my top group folder layer, which is the mountains, and then come down here and click on the new layer icon at the bottom of the layers palette. So you should still have an active selection here. And while you do, go ahead and press G on the keyboard to get your gradient tool, Alt-Option to toggle to the eyedropper, and click on any of this red text here just so you can sample that same red color. Now, that should now be your foreground color over here. And if it's not, remember how I said before you can use X to toggle back and forth between your background and foreground? Well, just do that to make sure that the red is in front, and then go ahead and press Alt-Option and Delete on the keyboard, and that's going to fill your selection with the foreground color. Now press Command D to deselect the selection, hold down the Control key and click on this layer and convert it to a smart object, and then double click on the layer and just name it Red Club, press Command T to do a free transform, and then hold down the Alt Option and Shift keys and drag inwards to scale the shape down quite a bit. Now what I want to do is kind of move this up here to the upper left corner, maybe somewhere around here. Press Return to apply the changes, and then let's go ahead and make a new layer. All right, grab your text tool or your type tool by pressing T on the keyboard, press D to get your default colors, and then X to make sure that white is the foreground color. Click and just type out the letter A, an uppercase A. Okay, now for this part, all I want to do is highlight the text, and I'm just going to use a different font. I'm going to use maybe Gotham Light or Gotham Thin. But if you guys don't have a font like this, you can use any other sans serif lightweight font. So maybe you have Avenir, you could use the basic Helvetica even, or just something nice and clean like that. Okay, because we want this to look like a playing card, so we're going to have the A for the ace with the red symbol below for some nice contrast. Now, you can move it down a little bit, and once you're happy with the size and placement of that lockup there, we're going to select the A on top, hold the Shift key and select the Red Club Smart Object layer, and go ahead and press Command G to put these into a group folder. Now from here, what I'm going to do is just rename this layer, maybe Corner Symbol Top. All right, then go ahead and just move it over a bit so that you can get it a little bit closer to the left and the top border. Press Command J to duplicate the whole folder, Command and the left bracket to move it down, and then press Command T to do a free transform. And once you see this box around the shape, hold down the Control key and click on it, and choose Flip Horizontal from this menu. Now hold down Control again and click on it one more time, and this time choose Flip Vertical. So we now have basically a mirror image of our corner symbol that we're going to move down here to the bottom right corner. All right, because anytime you look at a playing card, they usually have the inverse on the other side of the card. All right, so I'm just going to move that down here to the corner, double click on the group folder name over here, and just change this one part from top to bottom, just so we know. Now we'll come back over here to our freebies folder, and I'm going to open up this cool ship illustration made by Vector Hut right in Photoshop. Okay, so I'm going to take this layer, just move the tab to the side, click and drag it into my document, hold down the Control key and click on the layer and choose Convert to Smart Object. And then let's just go ahead and name this layer ship6.png. And then I can go ahead and place this into a group folder and just call it ship. Now, what I want to do from here is double click on the layer, check off color overlay, and then let's go ahead and enter the value for our gray, or we can just sample some of the gray from the background of our document here, where I'm just grabbing the color from the ribbon. All right, then go ahead and hit OK. Now press Command T to do a free transform, hold down Alt, Option, and Shift, and just drag inwards from any of the four corners to scale it down from the center. Now what I want to do is kind of place this in the top right corner, opposite from my letter A with the red club symbol next to it. I'm actually going to place this one on the lower left, though, I think, instead. And then I can make a copy of it by pressing Command J, press Command T to do a free transform, hold down the Control key and click on the shape, and choose Flip Horizontal, hold down Control and click again, and choose Flip Vertical. And now I'll move this copy up to the top right. Okay, so you should end up with something like this. Right, so we're looking pretty good so far, guys, and we're getting there, definitely making some progress. So the next thing I'm going to do is bring in this really cool sea creature illustration from the freebie folder. This is just one of many kind of sea creature and animal illustrations that you guys will get with this bundle, but I thought this one would be a really cool one to work into our design. So what I want to do here is click and drag this over into my working document, double click on it, and I'm just going to rename the layer Kraken. Hold down the Control key and click on it and make it a smart object. Press Command T to do a free transform. Hold down the Control key and click on the image here, and then choose Rotate 90 degrees counterclockwise. Go ahead and press Return to apply the changes, and then you can place it somewhere in the middle here because we're going to apply a few changes to this before we move on. So, because we made this a smart object, I can actually now double click on the layer to go inside. So before, if I was adding a layer style, I would be kind of double clicking on this part of the image. But once it's a smart object, you can kind of double click on this icon on the main image itself, or in this thumbnail icon here, to open up the original shape. So once I have this open, I'm going to come down here to the adjustment layer icon at the bottom of the layers palette, click and choose black and white, and then come back down and add a levels adjustment layer as well. Now you should see the properties for this where you're going to want to grab the left slider and bring it into the right until it's set to around 72 or 73, just so it looks like a nice high contrast black and white illustration. And now you can go ahead and press Command S to save it, and then once it's done saving, press Command W to close that tab, and you'll see now that it has updated in our main document. So that's one of the nice benefits of using a smart object, is that you don't have to deal with having all of those adjustment layers in your main document. You can kind of keep them nested inside of your smart object. I actually want to make these tentacles look like they're coming from behind the club shape and then some parts coming in front and kind of overlapping in different areas. So I want to look at first at the stem of this club shape here. And I think I want the tentacles to kind of, overlap and look like they're coming in and kind of wrapping around the bottom here. So I'm going to place it over here on the club shape and then come down to the bottom of my layers palette and click on the Add Layer Mask icon. Now from there, I'm going to press the letter B on the keyboard to get my brush tool, and then I'll use my right bracket and just hold it down to make the brush larger. Now you want to make sure that the opacity is set to 100% and that you have a solid black fill for the foreground color, and then all you have to do is begin painting, and it's basically going to erase or hide any part of the sea creature that you do not want to see. So that's one of the nice things about using masks, is that you can just choose what you want to be visible and what you want to get rid of. Okay, so for this, we're going to get rid of most, actually, of our sea creature, except for the part that we want to overlap. So I'm going to play around with the size of my brush by using the left and right brackets. And I'm just going to paint around this as close as I can get. Okay, until I basically just have this main piece here on the bottom. Now, in order to make this look like it's going behind the club shape, we're actually going to have to open our club symbol. So go to the group folder here, club symbol group folder, click on the small arrow, and then inside you should have this club smart object. Hold down the command key and click on the smart object thumbnail, and that will activate a selection around the shape. Now, once you have that selection active, come back to your Kraken layer, click on the layer mask to make sure that that's selected, and then press B on the keyboard to get your brush back. And now you can just kind of paint out any area inside of the club shape where you do not want this to be visible. So this will just help to give you a more precise kind of selection here, and you can easily paint out any of these areas without worrying about going outside of the club shape and erasing too much. Okay, so here, for example, I want to take that piece out so that it looks like the tentacle is coming from behind this bottom shape and wrapping in front of it. Erase this front piece so that it looks like the tentacle is really coming from behind it and wrapping on the bottom. Okay, so hopefully you guys kind of understand how that works. I know it can be a little tough to explain and understand layer masks until you see them in action, but it creates a pretty nice effect. Okay, and we're actually going to push this a little bit further in just a couple of steps. But first, what I want to do is go ahead and make another copy of this. So I'm going to press Command J to duplicate my Kraken layer. Now, select the layer mask over here in your layers palette, hold down the Control key and click on the mask and choose Delete Layer Mask. So it's going to give us a whole fresh new copy, which we can then actually drag down below our club symbol group folder. Okay, so let me just make sure I didn't put it in the folder. You actually want it below the folder. So if you do by accident drop it inside of this folder, all you have to do is press Command in the left bracket, and that's going to move it down one place in the layers palette. All right, so it's now outside of that folder. And I can now press Command T and kind of play around with the placement and look for an interesting area that we can use here behind our club symbol. All right, so I don't want to use the same piece because I don't want it to look, too similar. So what I can do is hold down the Control key and click on the shape here and choose Flip Horizontal so that I can now kind of play around with the other side a little bit. All right, and I'm just looking for an interesting piece that I can kind of have on the right here. And I kind of like the way that looks. So I'm just going to go ahead and press Return. Press the letter L on the keyboard to get my Lasso Tool. And this is just another selection tool that we can use to basically kind of choose which area we want to appear behind the symbol. So I'm using my polygonal lasso tool, just closing this shape here. And now all I have to do is come back down here and choose the Add Layer Mask icon. And now you will only see that one piece. All right, so go ahead and duplicate this one more time, delete the layer mask, and now press Command T to do a free transform. And you can basically flip, rotate, scale, whatever you want, just to add some variation here and mix things up. Okay, and just try to find another kind of interesting piece here that we can use. All right, for this side, maybe I'll flip him horizontally again. And maybe I can use one of these other pieces here, or even let's try flipping it vertically and see what that looks like. Okay, I think this is pretty cool. It looks a little crazy at the time, because there's just so much detail in this, but you can really end up with some pretty cool results by just playing around with these layer masks and doing this kind of thing. All right, so I think here I'm going to press Return because I'm looking at this piece and I'm pretty happy with it. So I'll once again use my polygonal lasso tool and just click and create a selection here around the shape that I want to keep. Close the shape, and then go ahead and click on the Add Layer Mask icon once again. Now, if there is a part here that I'm not happy with or that I now want to rotate, I can just do that easily by pressing Command T, click and choose Flip Vertical. And now I can just move that one shape around, maybe rotate it a bit, and then just place it back behind my symbol here so that I can, kind of decide how much I want to be showing at any one time. All right, but I think something like that looks pretty good. Then I'll press Return to apply the changes. All right, I'm just going to use the Shift key and the arrows to kind of play around with the placement just a little bit more before I make one last copy. So for this one, I'm going to select my top copy, the original one that we started with, press Command J, hold down the Control key and click on the layer mask, and then choose Delete Layer Mask. And now I want to have some of these cool tentacles kind of overlapping on top. So I'm going to press Command T to do a free transform and choose Flip Horizontal. And then maybe from there, I can get like a cool piece here kind of cutting in and just overlapping on the top here. So I'm going to rotate this a bit Okay, maybe something like that looks pretty good. And then go ahead and hit return once you're happy with the size and placement. And now what I'm going to do is add a layer mask. And because I want to be painting out most of this object here, I can just press the letter M on the keyboard to get my rectangular marquee tool. Click and drag around this whole shape here on the bottom. And then as long as black is set to your foreground color and your layer mask is active in the palette, you can once again press Alt, Option, and Delete to fill the layer mask with your foreground color, which in this case is black and will work to hide everything that you've selected. And then from there, it's just a little bit less work that you have to do to brush out the rest of this illustration here. Okay, so I once again need to get a selection of my club shape, just so I can make this look more precise and clean. So I'm going to expand the club symbol folder, hold down the Command key and click on the layer thumbnail icon, and then I'm just going to paint out this little piece here. Okay, and what you should be left with is something like this, where it looks like it's coming from behind, coming in, and then just going off of the top. And we can close our club symbol folder, and we can just take a look at each of these other layers here and see if there's anything that we missed that we may want to take out. It does look like I need to clean up this selection a little bit here, just on the inside and a little bit on the outside too. Okay, so just turning on and off the visibility of a layer sometimes can just help you see some areas that you might have missed. But one other thing that we can do here to make this look even cooler is double clicking on the layer on our first copy and check off the stroke option here. And let's go ahead and add a 2-pixel stroke set to the outside and using a solid white fill color. Now go ahead and hit OK to apply the changes. Now once I've applied a stroke, it actually reveals a few more mistakes or areas that I've missed. So that can be a helpful way to kind of see what areas you need to clean up too. By adding this stroke, I can now see that I did a pretty bad job masking the right side. So I'm just going to go back in and clean this up a bit. And if you need to zoom in, go ahead and do that just by pressing Command and the plus symbol on the keyboard. And then using your black brush to just paint out any of these little segments or areas that you may have missed the first time around. All right, and then press Command 0 to zoom out. And I'm just going to brush over the left edge here. It looks like there's a little bit of a stroke there too. And now what I'm going to do is hold down the Control key and click on this small FX icon and choose Copy Layer Styles. Click on the copy just below, hold down the Command key, and select both of the copies that are behind the club symbol. So I should now have my 3 remaining copies selected all at the same time. And then hold down the Control key and click on any of these 3 layers. And now we'll choose Paste Layer Style to apply that same 2-pixel white stroke to all 3 of these remaining copies. Now, as I turn on and off the visibility for each of these layers, I can once again check and see if there's any areas that I missed. All right, and again, there's quite a few areas on this front copy here that I'm just going to go in and clean up really quick. All right, so I'm just going to paint out a few of those segments there that I missed. Zoom in to get a little bit more precise here. And just use a smaller brush. I'm just using the left and right brackets again to control my brush size. To go in there and maybe paint, actually I have to paint in a little bit right here. Just clean up that selection a little bit more. All right, Commands and the minus symbol will zoom out, or Command and 0 will fit the entire thing to your screen. And that looks pretty good. All right, so now what I want to do is select this top Kraken copy, hold the Shift key and select the copy below, and then press Command G to put it into a group folder. And I'm just going to call this Kraken Top, and do the same thing for these 2 behind the club symbol. Select the first one, hold Shift and select the one below it, press Command G to put it into a group folder, and we'll just call this one Kraken Back. Kraken Back's like a chiropractor. So I'm going to come in here really quick and just clean up this stroke on the bottom. So it looks like there's a little piece there that I want to get rid of. All right, and there we go. All right, so from here what I can do is maybe, change the size or the placement of my text in my mountains. So I'm going to select the Ace of Clubs group folder, hold the Shift key and select the mountains above it, and then go ahead and press Command T to do a free transform, and just drag inwards a little bit while holding the Alt, Option, and Shift keys to scale it down just a touch. All right, and then from there, let's go ahead and navigate back to our freebie folder to add a few finishing touches. All right, so now I want to navigate to my freebie folder and grab all 3 of these grainy and gritty vector textures. So I'm going to select all 3 and open them up in Photoshop. And I'm just going to quickly rename each of these layers. I can press Command A to select all, Command C to copy it, and then come over to my next one, double click and paste the same name, and just change the number at the end because they basically have the same file name except for those numbers. Okay, so I want to do that for each of these 3 textures to make sure that they are all named. And that will just help us to keep track of these layers once we bring them in here to Photoshop. So I can now close a few of these tabs. We just brought in 17, I believe. See, that's where it comes in handy. So now we can just go ahead and drag in the remaining 2, number 7 and number 8. All right, so I should now have all 3 of these texture layers in my file. And I'm going to hold down the Control key and click on each one and make them a smart object. So that way we can play around with the size by scaling it up and down without worrying about any loss in quality. Okay, but before I do that, I'm just noticing there's a little piece in the upper left-hand corner here by my corner symbol that I missed earlier when I was painting out these little segments that I missed. So glad I caught that just now, just to clean that up again. And from here, what I want to do is grab each of my textures, press Command T to do a free transform, and just experiment with the size and the placement of each of these kind of grainy, gritty textures that we'll be placing on top of our overall image. And if you want to zoom out to see the entire thing, just press Command 0, and then you can hold down the Alt Option and Shift keys and drag inwards to play around with the scale and scale it down from the middle. Go ahead and press Return to apply the changes, and then go ahead and do the same thing as well with your last texture. Okay, but once you're happy with the size and placement of all 3 of these textures, what you want to do is hold the Shift key, select the bottom one, click on the top one, and press Command G to put them into a group folder. And then I'm just going to call this folder Top Textures, double click on the group folder, and apply a layer style color overlay to the entire folder. So instead of using this gray color that we've been using, let's just go ahead and make it a solid black. And then go ahead and click and make that solid black. All right, and now we have this cool looking texture overlaid on our entire image. And that's about it, guys. So we've created this really cool looking nautical themed playing card design using some of these awesome vector elements from the latest bundle. So as you can see, there's quite a lot of things you can do with this. There's a lot of unique and interesting ways that you can use some of these elements from the bundle. And I know that you guys would have a ton of fun using this just like I did creating this piece. So I hope that you guys enjoyed the tutorial and hopefully picked up a few new tricks along the way. Thank you guys so much for watching and for following along. This is Eric Vasquez, and we'll see you next time.